Amazon EC2 requires a storage to boot, and that storage is the block storage associated with Amazon EC2 instance. So you could get started and add a block storage. That block storage would allow this EC2 instance to boot as well as to keep additional data depending on the use case. So the first type of storage we are discussing for Amazon EC2 is a block storage. Now, you could utilize two type of block storage with Amazon EC2. Let me go ahead and draw these things so it would be much easier for you to understand. Now, you remember probably that this is the server or the host, which I would call, let's say here, the Nitro system, and my EC2 instance would be running on top of this Nitro system. So I have this EC2 instance running here. This would require some storage. Now, what are my options to provide the storage? This Nitro system which we are using, chances are that it also has some local storage on it. So what we could do if we want, we could take this local storage of Nitro system, which I would write here as local, and associate it to EC2 instance, and now EC2 can access this local storage. That is one option. This type of storage, which is presented directly from the system where EC2 instance is running, is called instance store. Let me write it down. So this is called instance store. This is also referred as ephemeral storage. Ephemeral is a short-lived storage. Intention of the storage is that it is only available till this EC2 instance is powered on. As soon as you power off the instance or it shuts down, the content of this local storage would be wiped clean. So it is not a permanent storage, it is an ephemeral storage which has been associated with EC2 instance, and this one is available on specific instance type. I would say not all instance types support this type of instance store, and I would say use case for this storage would be probably I am looking to use some swap file, or maybe I want to store some data for temporary purpose. That time I would prefer instance store, but it is not a permanent storage at all. If you need permanent storage, then better would be to use different type of storage, which we will refer here as EBS or elastic block store. Elastic block store is a permanent, or I would say persistent storage. Once you store your data on it, it will be stored unless you intentionally go and delete it. So it will persist your data for longer period as long as you want it. Plus, this can be available to almost all instance type. All instance types should be able to leverage it, and its a use case would be any common thing which you want to do. Let's say you want to run operating system or host a database or host an application or store its data. In all these cases, this would be a better storage available. Now we will see that how this storage would be made available to our EC2 instance. This storage, which is elastic block store, is provided from a storage system. So consider, let's say this is a storage system in AWS data center in AWS availability zone. Let me write it down. This is a storage system. Now, this storage system can have or will have multiple types of disk and multiple type of capabilities on that. Maybe it is made up of SSD based disk, maybe it is made up of magnetic disk, maybe it is made up of SSD which is much of the high performance. It may have SSDs which are of a standard performance, so it depends. Now, when you say to that I need some storage on EC2 and you create something called a volume, what happens behind the scene that whatever you requested, that much capacity would be made available on from the storage system. So if I said I need a SSD based high performing 100 GB volume, so on the storage system, 100 GB volume would be carved up for you, will be created for you, and then this 100 GB volume will be presented to the EC2 instance. Now, how the presentation of this volume or association of the volume would work on for this, these systems are connected over network. So there is a network connection that is connecting this storage system here and which is connecting my system where EC2 instance is running. So this system is allowing storage to be accessed over the network, and once I have made this kind of arrangement possible, I means AWS, volume I have created 100 GB would be visible to my EC2 instance, and now this EC2 instance can format it, partition it, and then create a file system to store data on it. That is on a high level what two type of options we have for block storage on a EC2 instance. One is called instance store, which is ephemeral, presented locally from the system where it is running, and second is called your elastic block store, which is away from the system. The benefit of this type of storage system is, let's say, due to whatever reason, come what may, maybe there was an issue in terms of electricity, performance, whatever, and let's say this Nitro system where it is running or this EC2 instance goes down and not available to access. No problem. My data is stored independently. This storage volume is independent of the EC2 instance. So once my EC2 instance goes down here, it will be disconnected. And if I want, I could launch another EC2 instance on a different system and then allow this system to access the volume where my data is present. So that is a possibility. In case one of the instance goes down, you can launch another instance and mount or associate the existing volume to the newer instance. All your data would be now available to the new instance, whatever you have started. So it makes it very independent, and all of this would be available over a network, and we are using here a block storage. All these options of instance store or elastic block store is a block storage where your operating system would have a control on the volume which is presented. So when we present the storage, this is referred as a volume. Now, few more things to understand here is important, that when you say I want a 100 GB storage system or I need 100 GB volume, it doesn't mean that AWS goes to this big storage system, finds a hard disk of 100 GB and put your name on it. No, it is a system. So it would take care of different aspects behind the scene like availability, its performance, its encryption if required, and its expansion if required. So it's not like one single independent disk given to you. It is a system of storage which is present with its own SLA, service level agreement, and its own performance characteristics, its own availability characteristics, and that is made available to your EC2 instance. Right. So hope this thing is clear, that what is an instance store and what is an elastic block store. I'll show both of these to you into the console. But let me quickly go to the slides and we will then go ahead and discuss some of the slide concept on slide, and then we will move forward. So here you can see the storage I was referencing about. So here is my instance store, local, ephemeral, limited in size, obviously because this system here physically would have a limited capacity of storage, so it will be limited in size, not available on all instance types. As I said, use cases when you want a swap space or temporary storage, probably that time you would be using a local storage. So here is the system where my instance is running, this is my instance, and we presented a volume from this local storage. On the other hand, elastic block store or EBS is provisioned over network. You could see this system and this system is communicating over a network. Persistent storage, permanently available. 64 TB max size. This depends on the different volume types. We'll discuss them. And it gives you choice of volume. Like if you see here, hey, this is a different type of volume. This is a different one. This is a different one. I could decide on what specific type of instance I want to use. Sorry, what specific type of volume I want to use. There is one more option with this in the instance which is called EBS optimized instance type. So I'll explain about this when we reach to console, and this can be used for any block storage need you want to run, operating system, database, log, application, it can serve all type of purpose. So let's go ahead to console and see these post storage into action. Now I'm going into management console here. I have one instance running, that is completely fine. I do not need to have an instance running. I could just start with Elastic Block Store here. See this. So this is Elastic Block Store, but there is no option here which says instance store. If you want to see that in action, you would need to go to instances and say, I want to launch an instance. And this time you can specifically look for an instance which would have instance store available. You would need a AMI which has instance store configuration in it. So I do not find them into quick start. Let me go to browse more AMIs and I would go to community AMIs, and here probably I would have something. Let me start searching here, and now I am searching here for instance store. Let's see if we get something. I clicked on enter. And if you see here, there are 176 community AMIs 209 into marketplace, and these are coming from different vendors like Veritas. Let me go to community and I would find Amazon Linux. This one would have a root device type which will be instance store. Root device is the volume from which your EC2 instance will be booting. That is displayed here as a instance store. And similarly, you may find different type of options to run your instance store volume. Not very common, as you could see, not that many AMIs available with instance store. So it is not something which people use, which customers use on a regular basis, but still it is a choice for some workload. I would say why I may consider still using it, because it doesn't have additional cost. Its cost is included with the instance itself. Whereas if I'm creating an Elastic Block Store, I pay additional money for that volume depending on the characteristics of that volume. So instance store is free-ish volume, whereas EBS has a cost associated on that. So that is instance store. I won't launch a machine from there. I would go back and then I would look for a volume here in Elastic Block Store. Now, if my EC2 instance is running, it will have a EBS volume like we see here. I can give a name to volume if I want to, like a tag, and this volume is called GP2. It is of size 8 GB. I will talk about GP2 in a minute. IOPS is 100. IOPS stand for input output per second. Basically, it is the criteria. It is the metrics which tells you that how fast or slow your application would behave, or how much time it will take for input output to how many input output per second it can handle. Throughput, there is a snapshot option created on where it is availability zone US East 1E. This is an important aspect. Let me again go to the blackboard. So if you remember that we have a concept of AWS region, this is my region. Second, here we have availability zone concept. For sake of simplicity, I am only creating two of the availability zone, but obviously you could have more if the need be. If you remember, our EC2 instances will be launched within an availability zone. So this is where, let's say, I launched one of the EC2 instance. Now, a requirement for it to have a EBS volume is that that volume should also be coming from the same availability zone. I could create a EBS volume here, and this can be attached to a EC2 instance. I can't attach a EBS volume which exists into a different availability zone, let's say here, and then say, hey, I want to attach you here. That won't be working, that won't be allowed. And technical reason exists for that. These availability zones will be miles apart from them. And I won't like to have a server whose storage is being presented over network, however fast it is, but still it is a network which may get disconnected and which may have some latency. So requirement is that your EBS volume should exist into the same availability zone where your instance is running, and then only you would be able to attach it. You can't attach a EBS volume from a different availability zone to an instance in another availability zone, that won't work. Okay, so wherever my instance is running, my volume should be present there. Let's go ahead and create a volume first. When I create a volume, I have to start with the basic information about volume type. I have to tell what type of volume I am looking for. These are different volume types supported by Elastic Block Store. I'll talk about them in a minute. Like right now, let me just focus on creating a volume. Let's say I want to create a 10 GB volume. IOPS is 100/3000. Maximum it can go up to 3000 depending on GP2. And then some additional information. This is my availability zone 1A, snapshot if I need to, and then tags if I want. Let's call it, give it a name that it is my 10 GB volume. I have added a tag here and I say create a volume. Be aware, you pay for Amazon EC2 in the size you create or for the size you create. It is based on provision size you would be built on. So if I have created a 10 GB volume, even if I have stored 1 GB on data in that, I would still be paying for 10 GB. So don't overcomplicate your billing by unnecessarily creating bigger volume. Start what is needed and then you can expand it whenever you want. It shouldn't be a problem at all. So start small and then expand if you need to. Now my 10 GB volume has been created, but this one is not attached to anyone. It is still into creating phase. Let me quickly refresh it. It may take little time depending on if you are talking about a very big volume. It may take some time, but currently it got created. As you could see, it is not attached to any of my instance. Now, if you look at this instance is into 1A because I can say the volume associated with it is into 1E, and 1A is where I have created my volume. So if I go to this volume and say I want to attach you volume, I won't be seeing that instance displayed to me. No matching running or stopped instance in US East 1A. So what I have to do, I have to be careful and create that volume into the required availability zone. Now, can I not copy this volume to another availability zone? I would say yes and no both. You can't directly copy this to another availability zone if you did a mistake. What you could do, you could create a snapshot and then you can use that method, but we'll talk about that. So right now, I think I made a mistake. Let me delete the volume and I would create this into the availability zone 1E to attach to my existing instance. So I would intentionally select here 1E and I would now say I am looking for a 10 GB volume. Let's add a tag again. Let's call it name 10 GB volume, and now my 10 GB volume should be ready. Once this volume gets ready, we would be then associating it or attaching it to the instance of my choice. Now if I go in action and I say, hey, I want to attach you, all right, let's go ahead, and here I could now find my web server on which I want to attach. Now this association is happening from the system side. Your operating system running within that instance still have to format that volume or mount that volume to get started, because it is like a raw storage we have presented to our our EC2 instance. So that raw storage operating system has to take control of, and then it has to format it, mount it, and then start storing file and create a file system on top of it. So I'm here and now I could say attach volume. So my instance is in running state. Let me quickly show that. But still I was able to attach a volume on that. So this is my EC2 instance. As you see here, it is into running state. And now I have two volumes which are associated with it, not the key pair. Let me go back to volumes. And here are my 10 GB volume and a previous 8 GB volume which has been associated with it. They both are in use. If I feel I do not need it, go ahead, no problem. And then you could force detach it. Best practice would be to stop the instance and then detach the volume. So there are no outstanding write or read request on that volume. But if you still want to detach it, you could by doing a force detach of the volume if the need be. So that is what a EBS volume is all about. Let me go back to slides and talk about the different volume types you may have. So EBS volume, there are two main categorization for EBS volume. One which is made up of solid state drive or what we call SSDs. SSDs are very fast performing storage. They work on the electronic, they work with some electronics behind it, whereas the traditional way of providing storage was a hard disk volume, which will have some type of magnetic disk or some disk which will rotate, and it would be then giving you the data or storing the data. So these are two main bifurcation. Either that volume would be a solid state drive volume or that would be a hard disk drive based volume. Hard disk drive base is still a valid choice, and again there is a bifurcation here. You may select a volume that is throughput optimized, which will give you a consistent throughput. Like I have application where I need to perform a lot of sequential read like log processing. Maybe I am doing some analytics job processing, some video streaming where throughput optimized storage may work well for me. Cold HDD is the cheapest option for storage. Maybe I'm storing something and the cost is the most important aspect for that type of data. Probably I would refer a cold HDD in that case. If I come to SSD, here we have more bifurcation. One is called general purpose SSD and another is called provisioned IOPS. General purpose, as the name says, this one gives you a balance of performance. Whereas when I am looking for provision IOPS, this is for the application where you need the highest throughput and highest or and lowest latency, and you want a guaranteed performance in terms of input output per second. That time you would use provisioned IOPS storage. And even in general purpose, we had GP2 or we have GP2 option, we have GP3 option, general purpose 2, general purpose 3, and obviously 3 is the latest one. And in provision IOPS, we have IO1, IO2, and IO2 block express. These are different type of provision IOPS volume which you could provide to your EC2 instance, and you can mix and match. You could say one of my instance would have a general purpose volume for keeping logs, one provision IOPS volume for keeping the database, and I would have a cold HDD in the same instance which I would use for keeping my backups. So it purely depends on use case. Plus you can change volume type if the need be while the instance is running. So you started with GP2, realize it is not what you were expecting in terms of performance, you could change it, and I'll show you that in a minute. Now I will give you a link where you would be able to find details about that what is inside this EBS volume. So I'm here on EBS volume, and inside that I could find information like general purpose, GP2 and GP3, what is the durability on that, what is my block express information, use cases associated with it, 1 GB, 16 GB, what is the size we can have. Here we can have up to 64 TB, which is our IO2 block express, relatively very new option. So depends on what you are looking for, and you can see what are different options are available. Can it be a boot volume? Answer is yes, all SSDs can be a boot volume. If I am going to a hard disk drive, I have throughput and cold, and then different aspect of that. These cannot be a boot volume, so I cannot boot my instance directly from it. There would be a additional storage for my instance. So check this table where you will get more detailed information about different type of volume, and you can decide on your use case that what works best for you and what kind of operating system is running and what kind of application is running, what type of storage needs it has. So summarizing what we discussed on EBS volume, EBS volumes are specific to a AZ, availability zone. You can choose them based on performance and price. And let me now go back to the console so that you could relate to the volume types. So when I say I want to create a volume, see this, I have these options: general purpose, GP3, IO1, IO2, throughput optimized, magnetic standard, cold HDD. So these are all the options available for me to get started. I could select any of them. Right. Another good part about these volumes are that can be expanded, but you can't shrink them. So in case you realize that the volume I wanted was 10 GB, which I created, but realize that hey, this is not going to be suffice, or after some time this 10 GB volume has filled up, I could go ahead and modify the volume. In modification, I could change its size if I want to, let's say make it 11 GB, and then I could change it to something else also, like I want to change it to a storage type. Now here, as it says, throughput optimize requires a minimum of 128 GB in size, so some of the volume may have their own minimum and maximum size, so make sure you are within that limit. I would just make it GP3 with 11 GB, what throughput performance I'm looking for. And the good part about console is that it shows you what is the minimum, maximum, and what is the baseline which is coming out for that. Like for GP3, I could have up to 16,000 IOPS, but if I'm going for, let's say, IO2, I would have 11,000 IOPS. It is based on the per GB of it. If I go ahead and say, hey, I would have you on this much of the size GB, I would be able to get this much IOPS associated. So it depends on what your use case is. I would just keep 11 GB and I would be just modifying it. So I'm doing two modification. First one, I am changing it from GP2 to IO2, or let's make it GP3, and I am making it 11 GB while my instance is running, and I can modify it. So the modification might take a few minutes to complete. It would show you into the console that it is going on the modification, and afterward you have no problem in using it. So it is still going through modification, right? So hopefully this thing is clear. You got a better idea on what this volume is, and we will talk about some more concept of EBS volume, and then we will move to the snapshot feature. So can be changed while instance is running. We did that. It supports snapshot. Snapshot is a good way to retain what is currently there into the volume. We'll talk about it. Snapshot can be copied to another region or account. We will see that in the next section. It supports encryption. So encryption would ensure that you follow some legal requirement or your compliance and security requirement to keep your data at rest into a encrypted format. So that is possible. Another option we have for the EC2 is called attached to single EC2 instance, but I have put a star here. Why? Because the newer volume type now allow you to go ahead and do a multi-attach. Not a very common thing, but let me explain on a blackboard what a multi-attach actually means. So you would have your EC2 instance here, EC2A, let's call it, and it would have a volume associated. Let's call it volume ABC. In default condition, this is how it would be accessed. But we sometimes have some software who requires a shared volume. Not very commonly used as a shared volume, but now newer volume type supported. That would mean I would be able to have another EC2 machine, and that should also be able to mount the same volume. This is what we mean by multi-attach. So this is there now, but not every use case would be fulfilled, and you may need some very specific type of instances to work on that. So some consideration which is there and limitations on that. So multi-attach volume can be attached up to 16 Linux instances built on Nitro system, is supported only for provision IOPS volumes, not for standard GP to GP3, and then some more limitation exist on that, what you can do and what you cannot do on those multi attach volume. So not everyone would have a use case for it, but just in case needed, multi-attach is now possible. Standard volume GP to GP3, they would still be attached to a single instance, but the newer volume type may allow you to attach to multiple instances. So I hope you have learned something new, and I'll talk to you into the next section where we'll talk about snapshots. Thank you.